from inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 36 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we are going to discuss rebuilding trade targets. So last week, we went over a bunch of veteran players that we thought were worthwhile trade targets. This week, we're going to take the opposite approach and talk about some rebuilding teams. For those of you whose teams have had a bit of a rough season so far. As always, make sure you're following this podcast on whatever platform you're currently listening to it on. We're on all platforms out there, so pick your favorite. Go give us a follow. You can follow us on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room. Subscribe on YouTube at the same handle. And go find us on Facebook if you want to as well. We appreciate it. And with all of that being said, you guys know the drill. Let's just jump right into this and talk about some quarterbacks that could be rebuilding trade targets. Now, before we get into actual players, I just want to mention first, you do not need to only focus on picks when it comes to making trades as a rebuilding team. Now, first-round picks are obviously like gold. That's your prime, the number one thing that you want to be going for is going to be those first-round picks. However, that's not always going to be the case. You're not going to be able to acquire those. Teams are going to hold on. There's only so many of them in your league. So second round picks, that's option 2. And then you go down the list. But before you get into the weeds too much on some of those lower, later picks, and even sometimes second round picks, if there are players available, rookies in particular, second year players that you see are a good fit for your roster moving forward. If you're aiming to compete next season in 2025, or you think you have a 2-year rebuild or 3-year, whatever your situation is, I'm sure there's at least 1 or 2 players out there that would be good fits for your squad. So don't limit yourself to picks only. I think a lot of times some of the best dynasty trades for rebuilding teams involve both picks and players. So if you can get a first round pick plus a player or 2, or a collection of later picks and a player, depending on the magnitude of the trade, keep that in mind. Don't just do picks only trades unless it's, a smaller dealer that's, strictly all that's on the table. But those mixed deals often end up the best for those rebuilding teams, because if one of those players, they hit, then that's going to be a huge opportunity for you to not only, hit on that player, but then hit on your draft pick. Something that a lot of people will do. If you have a really high value draft or a high value player, think like a receiver, you have in AJ Brown or somebody like that. Instead of just trading him for picks, you can trade him for a lesser receiver that's younger that you're hoping will take the next step, and picks on top of it. So I did something similar. I was able to acquire Christian Watson and 2 first-round picks for AJ Brown before week 1, and it's a team that I'm fully rebuilding. I really needed those picks, and I was a fan of Christian Watson. If you listen to the show in the summer, you know that I was pretty excited about his possible boost into being the number 1 receiver there in Green Bay. Hasn't exactly worked out. We've seen flashes, but unfortunately, it's still been a bit of a mess in Green Bay, particularly with Watson. But those first-round picks will be very helpful for me. So keep that in mind. A lot of people, if you don't want to go, having a player like Brown or a CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, whoever it is that you might be trading from, kind of the peak of their value, it doesn't just have to be multiple picks and a lesser player. It can also be, just one tier down of players. Think like a Jalen Waddle and a first or something like that for one of those high, elite level players. So keep that in mind as you make your trades and you consider your offers as we get into the midway point of the season. So now that I've had that little rant, gotten that out of the way, let's talk about some actual players. I've got 15 names spread across, a majority of them wide receivers, but I do have 2 quarterbacks that I want to start with. And first on the list is quarterback J.J. McCarthy of the Minnesota Vikings, QB 19 on Keep Trade Cut. And he is someone that, to me, seeing, there you go, you heard a little sleeper notification in the background, but seeing Sam Darnold have the success that he's had so far this season only makes me more confident that J.J. McCarthy will be a good quarterback. I think that the system there in Minnesota is very good. Kevin O'Connell's a great coach, great offensive system, and J.J. McCarthy to me is a more talented quarterback, more talented player than Sam Darnold. So, not to mention, if any of you have seen Michigan's offense this year without him, you know just how important he is. So, I absolutely believe that he will take over as the starter next season, unless we see some generational run from Sam Darnold where he just really, really plays out of his mind. But I think that we're bound to see a little bit of regression from Darnold throughout the season, and enough of a window that at some point early next year, McCarthy, I believe, will take over that job. And we don't actually know if Darnold will be, re-signed in Minnesota. I believe he is going to be a free agent. I'd have to double check that, but I believe he's a free agent. So, we'll see how that situation shakes out. But J.J. McCarthy, the first quarterback on the list, the cost in a trade has probably dropped a little bit, particularly if he is on a contending team because of his injury that knocked him out for this season. So if you're in a league where your draft order is decided by reverse max points scored, adding injured players is also a great tip because you know that you're not going to be accumulating points. But if they come back healthy next year, they're going to be able to help you out, and you probably got them at a bit of a discount as well. So keep that in mind. He also obviously is not going to, impact your week-to-week games if you are in a league that just does kind of a standard worst record gets the first pick. So same message is going to apply here to Michael Penix Jr., QB 21 and Keep Trade Cut. He's the second quarterback on this list, and I think that fantasy football managers are often very easily swayed by, the most recent games, and they kind of forget and devalue about injured or backup players. So J.J. McCarthy, for example, injured. Penix, the backup, not playing. Now, with Michael Penix, this is obviously expected. We knew that Kirk Cousins was going to be the starter for at least this year and almost certainly next year as well. But Kirk Cousins has had a bit of an up and down season. Started pretty slow and then, has picked it up. But he had a rough game last weekend. So, you might want to wait a week or two until Cousins has another good game because I'm sure it's coming. We talked about Cousins last week actually as a veteran buy candidate because I do think that the schedule sets up very nicely for Atlanta as we get into the fantasy football playoffs. So maybe wait a week or two, but it's going to be worth checking in on Michael Penix because if he's on a contending team or, there's some sort of situation where that, team needs an asset to make their playoff push, Penix is really a disposable asset for them because they know that they can't count on them. Championships have to take priority over the future when it's, something like this. So if he's up for grabs and you're a rebuilding team that, especially if you're one that might take a year or two until you are really ready to contend, Michael Penix Jr. might not start until 2026. So that could work for your team if you're in a bit of a longer term rebuild. But even if you're not, Kirk Cousins, while I expect him to be, a pretty solid fantasy quarterback the rest of the season, if Atlanta isn't winning games or they miss the playoffs or Cousins, has a continued streak of bad performances or, an injury is always possible after what happened last season too. So, Michael Penix Jr. is going to step right into a very good offense with a good coaching staff. Drake London has, had his big breakout. Kyle Pitts has had a couple nice games now. So, Darnell Mooney. So this is a really nice offense for quarterbacks. So they play in a dome as well. So there's a lot to like. And so the future is bright for those two quarterbacks. Now, moving on to running backs, I want to make one big disclaimer. If you are a rebuilding team, do not trade for running backs. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. It is only going to get you in trouble because the running back landscape changes so fast and changes so much year to year. The odds that you're going to be able to successfully predict what running backs are going to be helpful for your team next season are pretty low unless you're trading for one of the elite of the elite, top 5, top 10 type of running backs. And chances are if you're rebuilding, those guys are not, A, they're not on your team in the first place. And so B, if you're looking in a trade, those players are, they're going to be so expensive. You're not going to be wanting to give up first round draft picks for, elite running backs, even if it is someone like a Bijan Robinson or a Breece Hall or a Jahmyr Gibbs, whoever it is. It's just almost always not worth it for you, even though, hey, Jahmyr Gibbs probably going to be good next year for fantasy, but that still doesn't mean you should be making an investment as a rebuilding team into anyone that plays the running back position. And even this year, look, we've had some ups and downs with Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, and it's not all, even Christian McCaffrey, who obviously was older, his stock has tanked dramatically. So it's just something, take your running backs year by year and don't make moves until after the NFL draft occurs. So just don't do it. Focus on receivers, focus on quarterbacks, take a look at tight end. Quarterback and wide receiver are the two most important positions when it comes to rebuilding, to get those areas figured out before you go elsewhere. So with that being said, though, I do want to give you at least two names at running back if you just refuse to listen to me and you want to go out and get a running back. So both of these are rookies because, again, I just don't think that you can make trades for running backs that aren't rookies if you're a rebuilding team and have it really work out for you. So Tyrone Tracy, the New York Giants, is the first name. He's running back 32 on Keep Trade Cut, and he's looked really good in the opportunity that he's had with Devin Singletary being injured, which is unfortunate because that's a player that I have been a fan of and have encouraged people to acquire. So, that injury has been tough, but if you drafted Tyrone Tracy, who I recommended to you in the 4th round of your rookie draft, he certainly is looking like he has a future in the league, and at a minimum will probably be in a committee the rest of this year and next year. And then there's always the potential, given further injury, that he is the starter in New York next year. So, bright future. His value has definitely started to creep up. So your window to acquire somebody like him is probably starting to get pretty small, because if he has, if Singletary gets hurt again or Tracy leads a committee with Singletary back, the price is going to skyrocket. So, now's kind of your last call to take a look at somebody like Tyrone Tracy. You're probably going to have to part with, a late second, early third, or a third and a player or something like that to get him. So, again, if you're a rebuilding team and you're wary about trading away picks, focus on, this is a good opportunity actually to, if you're trading away some veteran players and you are getting picks, but you want kind of a lesser asset or two to fill out the trade, make it look nice for you, getting players like Tyrone Tracy, who, it's hard to really place a value on them because, they were drafted just recently as a rookie in the 4th round of your rookie draft, but they've looked good. But, the team that has them probably, isn't looking to trade them away for a third, but a second feels like it's too much. It's one of those tough situations where making it a player trade or incorporating it into a larger deal makes a lot more sense. So keep that in mind with some of these players, especially some of these wide receivers when we get there. But the next running back is Jalen Wright of the Miami Dolphins. He's RB41 on Keep Trade Cut. And I fully expect Wright to be the number 2 back in Miami behind Devon Achane next year. And that will certainly have some value, assuming that Tua is healthy at quarterback, or they figure out the quarterback position if they need to go elsewhere. But as long as the quarterback play is sufficient, this offense can be very good. Now, we've seen the struggles this year. Wright is clearly buried on the depth chart right now as the number 3, sometimes 4 guy there. But it seems like he's kind of locked in as the number 3 right now. And he's had some nice moments, albeit pretty limited playing time. But again, so if you're looking for a rookie running back to add as a rebuilding team, I think Jalen Wright is somebody that fits the mold of somebody that could find his way up the rankings in the offseason. All right, so moving on over to wide receiver, where I have a kind of a longer list here. I believe it's 8 names is what I think I landed at. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so a lot of rookie and just other young players here. In fact, I think looking at this list, I believe Every single player is a rookie. Wow. Okay, so I didn't intentionally do that. However, I do think it just makes sense, and you'll hear why here as we go through these players. So first up on the list is going to be Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. He's wide receiver 46 on Keep Trade Cut, first round pick of the 49ers. And with the Brandon Ayuk injury, the price is going to absolutely rise with Ricky Pearsall. So, your window is probably extremely small to get this done, probably before Sunday's games, because, he was a first round pick. He was drafted in the middle of the second round in most rookie drafts in Superflex leagues. Deebo Samuel's been banged up, so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Pearsall, who is back after being shot in the offseason. So pretty wild scenario there for him. But now he comes back. He has a bunch of opportunities on the field. And so at wide receiver 46, I think that's a pretty good, area to still acquire him. But again, this price is only going to go up. So take a look, see who has him in your league and see what you might be able to get for him. I think a second round pick is probably still good enough to get it done, assuming it's an early second round pick. But if you are a rebuilding team and you're trying to hold your early second round pick, which I think would make sense, again, this is an opportunity to send off a veteran player, trade away Deebo for Ricky Pearsall and a pick of some kind. Work out something along those lines where you can get rid of your vets if you're not going to the playoffs, and turn them into younger players and picks. Next up on the list is Troy Franklin, wide receiver 61 on Keep Trade Cut with the Denver Broncos. And after a very slow beginning to his career, he's got on the field now. He's shown chemistry with Bo Nix, which makes sense since they played together in college at Oregon. And this is somebody that has a chance to be the number one wide receiver on this team. Cortland Sutton, there, some trade rumblings. I don't know that I expect that to happen just because Denver actually is, kind of hanging around in the playoff race. So, there's certainly a team that's going to be fighting for a wild card spot. And Troy Franklin has sort of taken advantage of the opportunities that he's had. And I would fully expect him to continue to see playing time and have his value rise as the season goes on. So rookie wide receivers just in general tend to see their value dramatically increase in the second half of the season because, it takes them a little bit to kind of get involved and get up to speed, learn the playbook, and then they, explode at the end of the season. So it's a bit of a dramatic example, but Amon-Ra St. Brown with the Lions did that. Zay Flowers did it last year with Baltimore. So we see guys that they don't do a ton in the first half of the season, and then second half of the year they really kind of break out. So we could be starting to see that with Troy Franklin over in Denver. Next up is Jalen McMillan with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's wide receiver 57 on Keep Trade Cut, and the opportunity is now there for him because Mike Evans is out for some time with an injury. And then, of course, Chris Godwin is out for the season, which is such a bummer because he was off to an incredible start to the season. And Jalen McMillan was a third-round pick. He's back from injury himself. And it's kind of a mixed bag of players. It's going to be, Sterling Shepard, who's a veteran that just, came in a few weeks ago. And then there's Jalen McMillan, who is probably going to lead this room for the next month. And so that's why I have him on this list. But then there's also Trey Palmer, who was a rookie last season and had some nice games, who's had a little bit of injury troubles as well. So it's a mixed bag here at the wide receiver position. But McMillan is going to have every, chance to show that he is a member, a future starter on this team, a core member of this team. So I think that if you can get him now, it's probably going to take a late second, early third in terms of a pick value, but in terms of players, again, throw him into a bigger deal, trade a veteran for him, see what you can make happen to get creative without having to give up your picks straight up because you really don't want to do that as a rebuilding team. So Jalen McMillan, the next player on this list. All right, Jordan Whittington, wide receiver 75 with the LA Rams. Now, he is another rookie that, has had some really nice games. We've seen him get that, wide receiver 1 treatment from Matthew Stafford with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua out with injuries. And then this past week, when he was ruled active and he technically played, put up a big fat 0, which screwed over a lot of people, myself included. And so now might be the time to go make a move for him if you're a rebuilding team, because, whatever manager has him might be a bit unhappy at the moment. Could be a bit of a rage trade. And there are Cooper Kupp trade rumors swirling. So if the Rams continue to lose, Kupp could be headed elsewhere. That would open up, more playing time again for Whittington, even when Puka comes back. Now, this situation would certainly be worse if Stafford were to be traded or ends up retiring, but I'm not sure that I see a trade happening there, at least not at this moment. It certainly could, but he still has some years left on his contract. So Jordan Whittington has had a pretty solid rookie season. I think that if he can keep this role in the offense, he will be able to help you next year as likely LA's number 2 receiver. So I think that makes him a worthwhile throw into a larger package. All right, now we've got 4 other guys here that, are definite, kind of more long shots. Although one in particular who we'll save for the end was not necessarily drafted to be a long shot, but we'll start with Bub Means with the New Orleans Saints, wide receiver 89 and keep trade cut. And with Rashid Shaheed out for the season, Chris Olave's been dealing with a concussion, so Bub Means is kind of the de facto number 1 receiver on this team. Derek Carr should be back in the next few weeks, and so we'll see what that connection looks like. And Bub Means is going to have every opportunity to, make the case that he belongs on this team for next season, that he can be their number 3 receiver. So, again, another nice stash and a bigger trade, Bub Means of the Saints. Next up is Malik Washington, wide receiver 100 on keep trade cut from the Miami Dolphins. And he was a day 3 pick that I actually liked a lot coming out of college. He had a really, really productive final season. I believe he, spent time with Northwestern and then Virginia in college. And with Tua Tagovailoa coming back soon, whether it's this week or next week, we'll see. But Washington could finally have some value and, be the team's 3rd wide receiver since OBJ is pretty much, invisible at this point. And then, be on the field at the same time as Tua, which wasn't the case at the beginning of the season because Washington had his own injury and then Tua suffered his concussion. So we'll see what that looks like. But again, that's somebody that I've stashed in a number of places, and I'm optimistic that Malik Washington can turn into a nice, slot player in the league. Next up is Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers, wide receiver 110, so even more of a long shot. But this is a player that I liked in the pre-draft process. I was surprised he went undrafted, but Coker has made some pretty nice plays in Carolina since being called up to the active roster, and he could carve out a solid role in this team next year if the quarterback play is better. And that would make him a solid fantasy, asset to have. So, there's going to be Xavier Legette, who will be there. Adam Thielen is still on IR. He'll be back in some capacity. And then I think he's still under contract. So we'll see what, how that shakes out next year. And then, but Mingo is probably toast. Deontay Johnson is there right now. We'll see how things, go for him next season. But, if they need to, commit money elsewhere and make some other moves, I think they've invested a lot as it is into wide receiver. So I don't know that they'll add anyone next season. So I think there could be some playing time. This is a true long shot. I mean, I don't even know that I could advocate giving a 4th round pick for him. I mean, I suppose you could. That's kind of like what his value is right now. But again, I wouldn't do that as a rebuilding team. I would simply put him into another package in some larger deal, because that's just the best way to handle this type of player. Now, the last player on the list at wide receiver is going to be Roman Wilson, the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver. He's number 78 on keep trade cut, and it's been a pretty rough go so far for Roman Wilson, mostly due to injury. He got hurt in August, missed, the first month of the season, and then he got back and, kind of needed to get up to speed, hasn't really, gotten into the games much. Finally was active, and then I think he just suffered another, hamstring injury. So it's a bit of a rough situation for him. But Pittsburgh really does need wide receiver help. They've always been mentioned as a team that is, poking around in the trade market for wideouts. So when he does finally get healthy and when he does, do enough at practice to get on the field, there's not a lot of other players that he really needs to worry about beating out. We're talking about Van Jefferson is the number 2 receiver on this team. So I think that Roman Wilson has more talent and he just needs to get healthy so he can get on the field. But because of the slow start and the fact that he really hasn't done anything, even when he was supposedly healthy, I do think that there's been a pretty solid price drop on him. So I think you can poke around and see if you can get something, get him added in as a throw-in. You could try a lower ball offer on him and see what you can get with a really late pick. He was going kind of at the 2-3 turn, and I don't know that you'd have to give up much more than a late third or early fourth. Just because I think a lot of people maybe are worried about his situation and think he might not have it. Because again, fantasy managers are a little bit fickle. They kind of go with, the flow of what's been happening over the last few weeks. So the vibes have been bad, which means, the price is lower. So it's a good time to buy low is essentially what I'm trying to say. All right. So moving on to the final position, tight end. I have 3 names here that I want to bring up. And we'll end with, the one that's, probably the least likely for you to be able to acquire, but certainly would still be a good player to have. And we'll start with a guy that I've been very high on all year, and he did break out. Everything that I was hoping for him seems to have happened, and that is Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. He's still very young. He's a second-year player, and he's tight end 8 on Keep Trade Cut, which I believe is the highest point that he's been at. So you would be buying high, but I am a believer in Kraft. He's been a very good player. He clearly has the trust of Jordan Love, and that's just a really good passing situation to be a part of. With Love at QB, you got a bunch of, good wide receivers, but none of them really great. And I don't think you would have to move a first-round pick for him. I don't think I would recommend doing that. But, if this is you have some veteran players to move and you're looking to make a tight end upgrade, Kraft is certainly somebody that I would target, because I think sometimes what happens is we get very stuck into our preseason rankings and kind of how we feel about players. And so it's a give and take, because sometimes we vastly overreact to players because of a game or 2 games, but then sometimes we don't move enough, especially when it's moving somebody up in the rankings that was, pretty far down on the list. I think we do a pretty good job of skyrocketing players that we know are going to be good, like a Malik Neighbors has, was already being ranked high, and then now he's ranked just really, really high. But somebody like Tucker Kraft was ranked so low before the season that, if you have anybody in your league that is, even slightly more casual of a player, and they maybe aren't as, laser focused in on this stuff, Tucker Kraft is somebody that you might be able to get for, a cheaper than average deal. You can throw him into a bigger trade. You can get him for, a lesser veteran and a mid to late pick. So, this is an opportunity for you, because if he continues to go and just, ball out, when the offseason comes around, this is not going to be a deal that will be available for you, because I think people will start to, really, okay, we've had a full season of him being the number 1. The value is going to be there. He'll be higher than tight end 8, especially given his age and being tied to Jordan Love. So now is kind of your last call for Tucker Kraft. Hopefully you were able to take advantage and get in on him earlier in the year or in the offseason for really, really cheap when I was recommending him. But if not, you still have an opportunity now to do just that. And he's, given the age, he's certainly helpful still to your team even if you're rebuilding. All right, next up, we're going to go back to the rookies, and that's going to be Eric All, tight end 22 on Keep Trade Cut for the Cincinnati Bengals. And All has already flashed a bit as a rookie. He should be the number one starter next year for the Bengals and Joe Burrow. So, Mike Gesicki is there. I don't think he'll be back. And, you might have to overpay a little bit because I think if somebody drafted Eric All in the 4th round, or they, picked him up as a free agent, they might be viewing it as like, oh, I've, kind of hit a diamond in the rough. I don't really want to, trade a player that I essentially got for free, which, there's certainly something to be said about that. But if a contender has Eric All and you're trying to make a bigger deal, this is an easy player for you to just throw in that's probably not going to shake up the rest of your larger deal. Because, let's be honest, if you have a bigger trade worked out for, a starting wide receiver and a first-round pick is involved and all these things, like whether or not Eric All is tossed in, probably not going to make a difference to the contender. It could if it's somebody like me, but in general, sometimes you just have to give up those, these, long shot but high ceiling rookies to get a larger deal done as a contender. So this is a perfect player to target for a deal like that. And last but not least, Brock Bowers, the number one overall tight end on Keep Trade Cut. He's a rookie. He's still not even 22 years old, which of course makes him, arguably the best player to have on your team if you're a rebuilding dynasty squad. There's maybe 4 to 5 other players that you could argue would be better to have. And funny enough, a couple of them are also fellow rookies like Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, Malik Neighbors. But Brock Bowers has been awesome. He's doing it with no quarterback play. He's super young, like we just mentioned. It's going to cost a ton to get him. I mean, I'm talking he's probably worth, 3 first-round picks. Now, I would not advocate giving that up as a rebuilding team because, that's just not a very smart move because you need to have, it's a situation where you need to accumulate assets and not, give away multiple picks to get one player. That's something that you can do more as a contender. But if you're a rebuilding team, this is something where if you have, a high value, middle age or veteran player that you're looking to trade, and maybe the first round pick situation in your league is not quite how you would like, see who has Brock Bowers. Your chances of being able to acquire him are probably close to 0 because let's be honest, if you have Brock Bowers on your team, you're just not going to give him up. But that doesn't mean you can't at least ask, especially if, they have another solid tight end on the roster or you have, a veteran tight end that you can send back and do a bigger package. So this is something where when you have the number one tight end in Dynasty and he's this young, you're going to be set for the next 10 years with Brock Bowers on your team. I mean, think about what it would have been like for you to have Travis Kelce on your team for his entire career. I mean, he's in his mid-30s and he is still producing for fantasy football. Brock Bowers can be that same exact type of player. He was billed as that type of prospect, one of the best that we've ever seen, and he's producing right away without a quarterback. Imagine how good he can be if he were to get, an upper level quarterback on this team. So it'll cost a lot, but it could very well be worth it. If you have some, big time players that are a little bit older, like an AJ Brown, for example, I would trade AJ Brown for Brock Bowers in a dynasty league, assuming tight end premium. I do want to make that clear. All of my dynasty leagues are tight end premium format where you get, half a point per reception extra for tight ends. So you get 1.5 points per catch instead of just 1 like standard PPR. So keep that in mind. I'm talking about Brock Bowers as like a top 10 dynasty asset in tight end premium. So he would certainly be lower than that in a non-tight end premium league. It completely changes my evaluation of tight ends. However, in tight end premium, I would trade away A.J. Brown for Brock Bowers. If you have a younger stud at running back like Breece Hall, I would trade Breece Hall for Brock Bowers because I just think it's a smart positional swap that you're going to get more good and usable years out of somebody like Brock Bowers than you would a Breece Hall. A.J. Brown, I think, certainly makes a lot of sense because of the age, but Breece Hall is still young. So, you might hear that and go, oh my gosh, like, why would I trade away a top 3, top 5 running back for a rookie tight end? Well, the running backs, their situations change so fast. 2 years from now, Breece Hall, his value could tank significantly. I mean, same could be said about any of the top running backs. Once their rookie contracts are done, everything is a bit up in the air. So, but Brock Bowers, we've seen enough from him that he's going to have long-term consistent value. And I think that that's just a smart dynasty roster construction move to make, is to go out and acquire him. So there you have it. That is a list of 15 different players that I think are worthwhile targets for rebuilding dynasty teams. Very rookie heavy, but that's kind of the nature of what it is to be a rebuilding dynasty team. And so big lesson here: target injured players if you're in a league that uses max points scored as your way of determining draft order, because those players are not going to hurt you, but you can really get a nice deal for them. And those contending teams will probably be willing to move them. J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. were the 2 quarterbacks I mentioned. Do not trade for running backs, but if you do something small as a throw into a trade. Tyrone Tracy, Jalen Wright, 2 potential options. And then wide receivers, I have 8 different rookies listed here. So we got Ricky Pearsall, Troy Franklin, Jalen McMillan, Jordan Whittington, Bub Means, Malik Washington, Jalen Coker, and Roman Wilson. And then rounding it out at tight end, Tucker Kraft, Eric All, and Brock Bowers. All right, well, there you have it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. This is the Dynasty War Room podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we'll be back next week with a big, fun episode. We're going to be doing a rookie draft redo. So we're going to go through and do the first 2 rounds of a tight end premium superflex dynasty draft, rookie draft. See how things would shake out now that we've had half the season. We've played through half the season. See how that changes what things were like back in April and May. So make sure that you are following the show so you don't miss that episode. And we'll see you back next week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.